Well, Micah, good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm well. I can imagine Simon just holding a phone and slowly trying to move away from his microphone to fade that one out.
Yeah, it's a nice touch. I think we're moving forward with this thing. I like where we're headed. Welcome everybody. It is part 2 of our session with Mark G from the COE. Last week we had a raucous conversation, full of questions, full of great questions. Plenty of insights, and so much so that we wanted to run it back because we couldn't even get through everything we wanted to get through. So we're glad to have you back. I see a massive amount of RSVPs for this one as well. So thank you all for joining. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. And thank you for joining. Micah, what's good, my friend?
Happy to be here. This was an exciting conversation last week. I thought it was really interesting. It's great when we get to really talk about the tech behind this stuff and dig deep, and nothing is really off limits as far as the questions and the conversation. So I liked it a lot, and I'm glad we get to talk to Mark again.
Let's be clear. There's a couple things that are off limits, but I think we all know we're all adults here, right? Mark, my friend, welcome back, and thank you for adjusting your schedule for this Encore presentation.
Absolutely, Gabe and Micah, always happy to be here. Love the last conversation, and I think we've all been saying the same thing. It's just the ability to kind of make it real. There's no shortage of opinions and articles and information, but when you see this technology in action, I think it's really, really interesting. Either people are able to directly apply it or get inspiration for other ways that they can solve problems using this kind of technology. So thanks for having me back, and look forward to the sequel.
Hey, Mark, I just want to do a shout out to the team, to your team. Yesterday, I had a couple of different meetings on some projects I'm working on for marketing and incorporating generative AI with the power of our automation copilot in A360, and some of the sort of breakthroughs as we were working on sort of one use case. Yep. We sort of zoomed out and figured out, even more applications that are going to literally save us millions of dollars actually in marketing.
Wow.
Super excited about it. Yeah, it's an interesting process, and I think what we've talked about and the way we've approached this thus far, at least with the stuff that I'm leading, is this idea of scalability. So building the foundational elements and actions and in agents, but making them malleable so that their fundamental action or activity or responsibility, if you will, is then transferable to other workflows. So creating content for, say, a blog and actually automating the publishing piece of it, which takes a lot of time and sort of connecting with people. But the idea of creation and then distribution, you could apply the fundamentals and the best practices to creating, it could be an email, it could be any piece of content. So there's having this strong base and this foundation is gonna be incredible for us.
And it's funny, Gabe, as you're talking, I'm just thinking that adage that says it's like the more things change, the more things stay the same. I mean, when you're talking, I'm thinking these principles like reuse. People like Micah and I are constantly talking about this, right? When we're designing automations. Same kind of idea. When we've got the ability to kind of build an engine, and then we can think of many applications for it. Again, back to these concepts of ROI and everything. That's where you can really, really, get lots of value out of doing one piece of foundational work, which is awesome.
Yeah, super excited. Getting close on the first one, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. Cool. Hey guys, before we get going, we've got a new feature, a new segment for the show. It's called the mailbag. So many comments and questions and all those things last week. And by the way, to our audience, raise your hand. This is an interactive sesh. I'm sure many of you have direct questions from Mark and Micah on, it could be in the weeds. It could be more, theoretical, could be what are we thinking about next? Whatever it is, we're here for you. So take advantage of this opportunity to talk with the boys here. But let's get to the mailbag. Micah.
Awesome. Our first mailbag item came from Ralph from Las Vegas. He said, "Hey guys, I really enjoyed last episode. Mark's perspectives were really interesting, And I was really surprised that such accomplishments could come from someone who spells flavor and color with a U, yet is somehow still able to successfully lead an automation program. Does he spell COE with a U as well? All kidding aside, Mark, I'm curious to hear your perspectives on automation use cases with a multi-AI agent architecture. Have you started exploring anything like that? Thanks again, Mark, or Ralph, sorry.
Well, Ralph throwing daggers first thing on a Friday morning. Thanks, Ralph.
I was going to say I don't want to get into a history lesson on where our language came from, but for all those that are listening, the reason we're having a laugh is because I'm from Canada, and so there are nonstop jokes about the way that we spell words, and I'm always trying to help my American friends learn how to spell. So where that's coming from.
We appreciate you, Mark. We appreciate it.
That's awesome. So Micah, it sounds like just kind of recap the final piece. The question is about using AI in what context?
A multi-AI agent architecture.
Yes. So I would say that's and what Gabe was just referring to a moment ago is a good example of that. I would say that we are just kind of tapping into that right now. The original automations we deliver with generative AI were not at that level of sophistication, but now we are coming to it. And I think there's a couple perspectives there that are interesting in different business functions, in particular, maybe marketing. One is that idea of kind of this supervisory piece, which is I really want to be able to trust the output of generative AI, whether that's going to be an input into my business process or go to a customer or supplier. I really want to have confidence in it. So the idea of having generative AI provide a supervisory role in validating it before it goes out the door. I think there's that piece. And then the other one, and some of this is what we're working on with Gabe and the marketing team, is this idea of crafting a message. If you think about the way many of us deal with communication, there's a message maybe that's going to go out. Maybe it's for public consumption, coming out of an organization for public consumption. There's often different lenses or different filters it needs to go through to get it right. So for example, of course, we've got to make sure that the core content is accurate. Then there will be lenses like, does this align with our brand? Does this align with the style and tone of communication that we want to communicate externally? Each of those in a typical organization might be different business roles that need to look at that communication and kind of give it the okay from that perspective. And so some of the use cases we're doing are doing exactly that. The idea of passing a message through a variety of different filters so that you get an outcome that is it's obviously we haven't lost the core meaning of the message, but it's also been checked off in terms of those different lenses it needed to go through before it gets consumed. So hopefully that kind of made sense. Those are some ways that we're thinking about it.
There's also I think the way that I think about this is like, if I have to complete this task and I could have unlimited resources for the biggest team and the most, specialists involved in the process, what would that look like? Because these are essentially just digital agents and I can spin one up and spin one down very easily. And as long as I can have clear role definitions for each of them, so they know their scope, they know exactly what rules they're supposed to be following. To me, it makes no sense why I wouldn't just continue to have these checks and balances in place and, try to define these different roles of what the perfect solution might look like.
I think too, what I've seen pretty so far, not exclusive, not like every time, but occasionally there's still some like I would call it an error, right? So you need like a fact check basically. But the ability to go through, and I think, by the way, my position so far, where the state where we're at, as fast as things are evolving, I'm using this, I'm playing with this a lot. If we can get to 80%, like 80% good on, fresh, net new generation, and then you as a human go in and augment and fix it and dial it in for yourself, I think that's the win. I think too many people are thinking like it's going to output the most perfect thing, and I can, I don't even have to touch it. In some cases, maybe for some like TikTokers or whatever, that's fine. But from an enterprise perspective, I think it's also about setting expectations. And I've had this conversation with various stakeholders and colleagues as well, is what actually is good. Because if you, even at 80%, think about all the time that it takes to get to that 80% if you were to do it sort of the old way, the manual way. And the fact that you can spin up, say, 3 different versions of the same of something, in my case for marketing, of a topic, in seconds, right? That gets me much closer to my end goal really, really quickly. The other piece that we're talking about with this multiple agent thing, we were just talking about it yesterday, actually, is the ability, and then using Automation 360 in Copilot, is the ability to go and reference the content generation piece against effectively a knowledge base, right? But against, say, Google Search Console. So looking at rankings and title tags and making sure that it's optimized. Referencing SEMrush, I'm talking from a marketing perspective, but referencing out, external sources with third-party data to say, this is the best way to optimize X topic, whether it's a header, a title, SEO, et cetera. And so you can have multiple bots and then multiple agents sort of cross-referencing each other to get to that 80. And in this case, we think we're going to get closer to like 90, but it's really exciting to think about. And we're already starting to do it. So it's pretty cool.
Copilot also provides a really good interface for being able to have that human in the loop too, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just like Gabe with a list of a bunch of prompts that he just like copies from a notepad over into some kind of interface. Like, we're putting this all together in a much larger, mature flow so that when there is time for a human review, that can happen through Copilot as opposed to like just copying and pasting all of these prompts everywhere.
Yeah, to your point with Copilot, that UX to me is the most important part, right? Because I think that was the game changer when GPT really hit, exploded, early last year, was this ubiquity and the ease of use for the normal, normal person like me. And I think with Copilot, what I'm thinking about is on the back end, we're creating multiple agents that are doing a bunch of different stuff, but you don't want to know how the sausage is made necessarily as, some stakeholder that wants to, say, create a blog or whatever, create some piece of content. You want to just say, like, I want to create X type of content for X audience, and it needs to be, in this tone, and just click those buttons and then get something back to review. And in our case, we're doing it where you would review the outline and the topics and then the copy, so that you're constantly in the loop to make sure it's flowing where you want it to go. Because that's effectively, you kind of mentioned this earlier, Micah, that's the standard flow that we would do with humans as well. Right. So we're not like reinventing anything necessarily in terms of the actual process. There's a little bit of, I guess, improvement of the process because we can do it sort of faster, I think. And that distribution piece becomes easier.
Yeah, I mean, the way I put that is it's the ability to iterate faster. So if it's going to take me 10 or 15 times to get it right, so be it. But if I can iterate quickly, then I get to my acceptable output a lot faster. And I think that's definitely what we're seeing. Gabe, some of the stuff that we're doing in marketing, for those that are familiar with this idea of A/B testing, just the ability in generative AI to very, very quickly output different variants. And, give me 5 different messages that accomplish this overall objective. And sometimes generative AI will get pretty creative and give you some different ones. And then in marketing, we talk about A/B testing, basically the idea of testing different ones of those to see which work better, which penetrate better, which messages are received better. Again, great sweet spot for generative AI.
Yeah, especially again, I don't want to make this a marketing use case episode, but of course I'm super excited about it. But the idea of always be testing, right? And in the idea of eventually getting down to I think that in marketing, just by the way, what we're seeing a lot of headlines, what's going to be marketing in 2024 trends, instead of this idea of hyper personalization. I think there's a fine line with like what you can do in terms of like just creating a persona, creating an agent or a GPT to sort of say, this is your target audience, speak to that. I think it's more about being able to test and make sure that you're dialed in and giving the information to the end user that they actually want, right? I don't think they care necessarily if who generated, if it's helpful to them. That's but in order to figure out what's helpful to them, you got to dial it in anyway. So we're talking about some really cool stuff that's happening and coming up. But I want to just revisit for those of you that happened to not join last week, which, wow, you guys missed out. No, just kidding. It is available on demand on YouTube. We've got the recording there. But also, this isn't just about doing cool use cases. Mark went into some detail last week about how the stuff that we've generated, the automations that have been deployed, are saving the IT org or more than 10% of overall budget, or the ROI is 9x what a standard automation is, which is already a high number at like 3x, right? Or sorry, I did the math wrong there, but
we get the idea.
You get the idea. I'm making you look really good, Mark. It's this whole numbers thing. I'm more of a words guy. No, I'm just kidding. We also came up with a key metric, right? What was the key metric that Mark mentioned?
I think he said 20. He had delivered 20 use cases, and we shamed him for that. And we wanted to talk about the true ROI numbers, which Mark helped to architect for our Pathfinder program. So we were only teasing him there. But last week we talked about the easy use cases that he was just getting started with. We started to dive into some of the medium use cases, and I want to pick up from there because there are some medium complexity and high complexity use cases that Mark and team has taken on that I think are super interesting that I want to make sure we get to touch on. So Mark, talk to us about some of these, like kind of you've got the low hanging fruit stuff done. Your team did the POCs, you did your first projects. What did you mature to from there?
Sure. Thanks, Micah. So a couple examples jump to mind right away. One of them, I think in the last session, we talked about this example. I think we called it Bot Scooby, but something that helps in the accounts payable area. Another one that's been interesting, we called this one Billing Buddy, but this helps on the accounts receivable side. So essentially with our customer invoicing process. That one's been really, really exciting. Those of you that have been following our product, if you've been looking at the last couple of releases, you're going to see the way that document automation has evolved. The document automation product, was already strong, but really, really in that kind of structured, semi-structured area. But the capabilities by adding generative AI to document automation have really taken it to the next level and unlocked a lot of interesting use cases. So this was basically a good example, Micah, of using document automation capabilities of generative AI to extract some key information about that customer order, basically to make sure that we've got a full reconciliation. If we've got a customer PO, we've got invoice details, making sure that all that information that's in different documents reconciles. And then basically we can move those draft invoices and automatically post them. And of course, if there is a discrepancy, again, we can pass those via Copilot. We can pass those to the right members of the accounts receivable team. So it's another example of, could we have done that previously? Maybe. Would have been difficult, and from a time to value standpoint, we really, really saw that one as being relatively quick to deploy and super high value, because obviously we want to make, that's a process we want to make sure is very, very smooth to quickly get our invoices out to customers.
And yeah, I like the use case. I want to talk some about why this is available now and why we couldn't have done this previously, right? If we rolled the clock back, let's say 2 years ago, and you tried to automate this same use case, practically, what would that have looked like, right? We tried to OCR a document. We're trying to do this key value pairing to extract data from it, but it sounds like these are unstructured document types. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, Mike, it's a combination of lack of structure and also many, many, many different formats. So you always come back to this idea with intelligent document processing of do we need to train the documents and things like that. And what we find with these new capabilities from document automation is, there really isn't any piece of the content that you can't get to. If you prompt it properly, you can kind of get to anything. So to your point, would this have been possible before? I think it would have been very, very difficult. When you've got the capability to be able to prompt and really get to any piece of data, whether it's semi-structured or structured or even unstructured, becomes really, really powerful for use cases like this.
Yeah, and I think the And Micah, that's a great point. I was actually going to ask something similar, but also, Mark, I want to dive into this just a little bit more. So, can you talk about sort of the systems and just the components there? And so, I get it at the high level you're using IDP, but like, what systems are you touching to be able to do this, and then get to an outcome?
Yeah, so I mean, the main system we use in our environment is Salesforce. That's where the invoices are sitting. This is an automation. If we talk about solution patterns, this is an automation that's a run remote via schedule. So basically, it's waking up every X minutes and saying, do I have any invoices in draft status? And then it's using that capability, document automation, generative AI, to extract information from PDF documents like order forms and customer POs, compare that to invoice details that are in Salesforce. And basically that's the reconciliation that it's doing. So it does that cross validation, and then ultimately, if the happy path scenario is everything reconciles, and in Salesforce we can actually post and communicate that invoice to the customer, and then of course if there's an exception, we can update that information in Salesforce and notify the accounts receivable team.
That's awesome. And is that in this case, is this Copilot embedded in Salesforce, or is it external?
Yeah. This one didn't have a Copilot component. It probably could for the exception piece, but most of this is happening kind of in the background as an unattended process.
Got it.
But yeah, those exceptions also could be dealt with using Copilot, like we did for Bot Scooby.
Awesome. And you mentioned something that that it was. I think you said it was fast time to value, but we're talking about sort of moving from the low-hanging fruit to, and again, when we talked about low-hanging fruit last week, I had asked the question, if it's low-hanging fruit, does that mean it's sort of low value, but it's easy to do? Now, that's sort of not the case, right? Low-hanging fruit means it's still high impact.
Yeah, it's a great point, Gabe, that we got into in the last meeting. We talked about low-hanging fruit, or we use that expression, quick win. I always say, quick win has two words to it. It's not just quick, but it's also got to be a win. It's got to deliver some significant value. So obviously, our organization is not the same as everyone else's organization, but in our organization, this is worth more than 2,000 hours of savings each year, just this one. And there are other KPIs we could talk about. So obviously, the cycle time in terms of being able to issue these and bill and then receive those payments from customers, obviously that's dramatically different as well. Capacity, as our business grows, we've got more and more of this activity happening. So we've also built in capacity, because guess what? This automation will scale with us. So there's a few different KPIs. The productivity one is already exciting, more than 2,000 hours of savings. But like I say, there's some other business KPIs that will be absolutely and tangibly impacted in a positive way by this use case.
That's awesome. I think the this whole conversation around IDP, or intelligent document processing. I remember back at Imagine, which, by the way, we just released the dates. Save the date, people. June 11th in Austin. We're back. So if you haven't been to Imagine, or you plan on coming, put a big circle around June 11th in that week, and plan to be in Austin, because it will be awesome. But I remember the Doc Otto. I like saying Doc Otto because it reminds me of Spider-Man. But I remember that session being, basically standing room only, and the excitement around that. So now seeing this come to fruition, and not just being released, but seeing you put it to work within the companies with the significant impact already is pretty cool. And this is excuse me, this is the point, guys. Like, we see a lot of headlines, and we know that a lot of people are still standing on the sidelines. But the art of the possible is the art of the actual for us now, and that's why we're here to help you understand what we're doing, what's actually doable right now. You don't have to, this isn't theory or just a bunch of cool ideas that maybe we can do somewhere down the line. These are things that are happening now, and they're super exciting.
Absolutely.
I want to remind the audience, raise your hand if you got a question. We're here to engage and answer any questions. You've got two of the best and the brightest here to answer your questions. So raise those hands and get involved. So Medium, we're sort of going up this hierarchy from that the quick win to the medium complexity, and then what other sort of automations are sort of in this in this realm, and then I also want to know what's the difference between sort of medium complexity and those quick wins.
Sure. Yeah. So another one I throw out in terms of medium complexity that's been really, really powerful for us has been this idea of conversational automation. So I think, again, thanks to systems like ChatGPT, we're all really, really comfortable with the idea of having a back and forth conversation. And generally, why are we doing that? Like if I launch ChatGPT and start prompting it, ultimately, what am I looking for? Well, typically, I'm looking for information. I'm looking for some answers. We started looking at that and saying, our vision is that generative AI, really, the analogy would be it's the brains, but automation is kind of the hands and feet that can actually get work done. So what would that look like in terms of conversational automation? And so what we did is, we analyzed what was available on the market. We kind of made a make versus buy decision. We opted to actually build this ourselves. We built this system that we call Jarvis. And so the initial idea was, for sure, it's self-serve. Any employee within our company that wants some information about something from a company perspective, whether it's questions about policies, how do I request time off, what's our holiday schedule look like, what are the pay periods, questions about policies. Sure, for sure, it can answer questions like that. But taking the next step to say, how can my conversation with Jarvis yield in actually getting work done? And so we've already started to build on that. We've got some in production already and a pretty aggressive roadmap. Imagine being able to talk to one of those interfaces and say, hey, Jarvis, onboard Micah Smith to our company. You're moving way beyond just getting information to actually asking Jarvis, asking your assistant to actually get work done. What's happening on the back end, of course, you can imagine is our automations are running. Those of you that are familiar with functionality like API tasks, you'll start to see how all this stuff goes together. The more we do automation that has a user experience component to it, the more important things like responsiveness are. And so when you combine these things together and you imagine that, I'm in a conversation with Jarvis, and I'm experiencing that kind of conversation back and forth. I make a request to get work done. And now I've got API tasks on the back end that can rapidly get work done, can rapidly run automations. All of a sudden, you've got an extremely powerful interface at your fingertips. So that's something that, believe it or not, that would be in our medium zone. But we've been using that really effectively. And like I say, it's got a pretty exciting roadmap over the next year.
It's really interesting because it enables, in this case, probably a lot of what our HR team is doing to scale quite quickly. When I think about the way that, an automation team would make a justification for doing a project like this internally or sell this to others, that comes back to something we've talked about before within the Pathfinder program, this concept of promotion and engagement, and the way that I'm talking about my program, the way that I'm getting people excited about it and some of the capabilities. When I think about this, Google has this concept of like a 10x engineer, where it's an engineer who's so effective, he or she is able to do the work of essentially 10 engineers all by themselves. And so they're very handsomely rewarded, but it's an interesting concept where they have this person who's like such a multiple of everyone else. I think of some of these automation capabilities as being multipliers for people within your organization, right? So now, because of things like Jarvis, we can say, well, our people experience team, our HR team, they are all 1.5x, right? Because they're able to accomplish significantly more than they could have otherwise, because maybe they're going to Jarvis to say, hey, help me with this onboarding process, or find the documentation related to time off if you're having a baby or something like that. So they can much more effectively and much more quickly execute the types of work that they're supposed to be responsible for.
100% agree. And I think the other thing I'd add on to that, Micah, is, when you look at these support functions, that's one of the things that very, very quickly became clear that it was going to be one of the greatest opportunities. If you look across an organization like ours, you'll see those kind of support functions everywhere. Like you just mentioned, people have questions about HR topics. People have questions for procurement teams. People have questions. There could be customer or product support functions. All these different business functions, our accounts payable team, all these functions, what consumes part of their day is answering questions. And so this whole idea of being able to answer questions, provide kind of a self-serve environment powered by generative AI, and even get work done, man, is it huge in terms of value of being able to transform those functions and get them focused on bigger, more complex problems to solve. Basically outsourcing that lower level kind of repetitive work to this technology. It's pretty powerful in terms of being able to transform those functions.
And I think the definition of that lower level work is changing too, right? I mean,
yeah.
What is lower level now was like higher level 2 years ago.
For sure. We're even, as one kind of interesting example, we're even going to use Jarvis as a support function for our citizen developers. So, one of the kind of questions a citizen developer has as they're trying to build an automation, do they have product questions? Do they have questions about the process? Do they have questions about how they interact with our COE? Again, there's another example where instead of having our COE spend half their time answering those questions, can we provide something to them that's self-serve?
Mike is constantly pinging me with questions like, do these socks match my sneakers? And which dunk should I get? So I'm building an automation for that to answer.
There we go.
Does this shirt match my eyes? What I want to touch on something because you're talking about like the HR use case, for instance. Within that, there's also PII, and some of the, maybe even from the invoice from a customer perspective, we don't want information being shared, or maybe the model,
right.
Conflating different, individual sources of data that might be used and distributed some other way. What were some of the considerations and what was the approach with regards to protecting data effectively?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess I'll give a nod to, our product team and what's happening with the AI Trust Center. So for those of you that are not following that, that really is going to be a really powerful governance layer to make sure that we've got proper governance over all these AI capabilities. Number one, I guess the other thing I'd say to your point, Gabe, is a couple things. One, I think we talked about the idea of having secure instances. So that was one of the very first things we did, is said we're not going to interact with these public LLMs. We're going to in our case we use Azure, but make sure that those instances are secure. The other thing that I think is really important that has been a consideration for us is, look, even if that's a secure instance, there's some type of data I would never even want to pass to them. And so what we're doing is we've been looking at a variety of different methods of essentially being able to mask data at a prompt level on its way into the LLM. So for example, if my prompt itself might have PII in it, what if my prompt has salary details or social security numbers and things like that in it? We're looking at some different ways and implementing some ways of masking that on the way in so that the LLM itself will never even see that sensitive data. And then obviously unmasking it on the way out. That's another thing that we've been working on. And you'll see that capability come into our product as well. That ability to mask PII type information, even if it exists within prompts.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really interesting because that data is not relevant in most cases to the task at hand. So there's no reason that it necessarily needs to be a part of the prompt that we send over.
Yes. And the other thing, Micah, is that the whole static code analysis capability that's already in the product, I think you'll also see that get some generative AI type checks as well. So for example, if there's a line of code somewhere within an automation and it's pretty clear that involves a prompt with some sensitive data, I think you'll see the code analysis capability highlight those rows and say, this doesn't look like a good idea. Yeah, maybe you should turn that into something a little more sensitive.
So we've talked about the medium, we've talked about the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, where people get started. People are here because they want to be inspired. They want to hear about the most forward-looking use cases that people are actually implementing. So as we start to think about what we've called in the Pathfinder program, like the scale phase kind of opportunities, those that get to be more complex, introduce us to some of those kind of automations that you and the team have been working on, and kind of where your head's at with where we're going from here.
Sure. So I think the key word I want to bring up at this point is the word transformation. I think many times we kind of get in the weeds way down in the level of individual business processes. But when you look kind of top down at a business function and say, this is the current state, here's how this business function performs, what should it or what could it look like? You end up with some really interesting conversations. And I think the examples I want to use here are going to be from our support function. For those of you that follow us on LinkedIn, you're going to see our SVP responsible for this function. He can't stop winning awards for the customer support function. One of the reasons is because he took that lens when looking at our support function and said, really, how can we transform this? In other words, what do we want that team focused on? What do we not want them focused on? And so a few automations came out of that. One of them is in the area of L1, L2 support for product issues. And so basically what that looks like is understanding what cases have come in our case in Salesforce, what support cases have come in. From a generative AI standpoint, we want to get answers for those. We want to understand what appropriate answers would be for those product support cases. And so that automation is grounded in two ways. Those of you that are unfamiliar with that, this idea of grounding essentially means I want my answers to be grounded in certain context. I want to give them certain context for generative AI to have in mind when it's responding. And so these things are grounded in our products documentation library. If you go to docs.automationanywhere.com, this automation is grounded in that. It's also grounded in all of our existing support KBs. So if you think about the whole history of different support cases we've had and resolutions, and you can imagine what this one is doing. This one's unattended, but it's picking up cases and automatically responding. Now, if things like the tone changes, then that's where we can serve that up via Copilot and involve a human. Obviously, if the sentiment becomes negative or we find that we're not appropriately answering the question, then that can go to a human. Otherwise, it's entirely alive, able to respond to customer support cases, including with follow-up. So in some cases, you send a resolution and the customer may follow up and say, oh, what about this? It'll continue to respond. So that's been one that's been extremely powerful. The other one is a completely different solution pattern. So
wait. Before we go forward, I do want to talk about that one because I think we need to pause a moment to catch our breath on what you just talked about. So in this case, we're able to basically take the breadth of knowledge of all of our documentation, plus every KB article we've had for, let's say, the last 5 years. And that's really the knowledge of our product teams, plus the knowledge of our CSMs and our support teams, pull all of that together and basically create a super brain that is able to answer these kind of questions and address customer concerns. Do you have any idea of the percentage of questions that can be automated in this approach?
Yeah, I can tell you that it was. It's been pretty staggering. I'll tell you that the numbers that I've seen are in the order of. Let me just give you a couple stats. Things like 89% reduction in resolution times that team is seeing.
That's laughable. That's so high. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. 21% productivity improvement. You were mentioning kind of the superpower added to the actual support engineers, around a 21% productivity improvement. Percentage that are being answered, I'm looking that up right now. I think it's in the order of 90+%, but I'll see if I can dig that up while we're on this call.
That's insane. If you said anything over 20, I was going to be floored. Because we didn't talk about these metrics beforehand, obviously.
No, we didn't. And the other thing that's interesting here, Micah, is obviously from time to time you'll get a question where there is no available answer. And so the other thing here is this idea of okay, cool. We didn't have an answer for this one. Somebody write the KB and educate our digital assistant, and now that answer is available next time. So the idea of continuing to feed that new information, that kind of feedback loop into the LLM as well is really, really critical for this. So it's getting smarter over time for sure.
The other thing I really like about this approach is that there is certain data that's coming in structured and certain data that's coming in unstructured, right? So let's go through. Yeah. I mean, I know this is specific to Automation Anywhere, but this will apply to everyone else who's listening, who has any sense of support for their customers who may be submitting queries, right? I have to start by logging in. So first off, we know who you are. We know what company you belong to. I then have to fill in some really basic information, which is standard of any kind of support ticket of like, hey, what version is your control room? Are you on cloud or are you on-prem? Things like that. What version of operating system are you using if this is related to my bot agent or something like that? And then I'm selecting from like a drop down of different categories for, is this related to document automation or to my control room or to my bot agent or to a specific package or something like that? So we've got that information. Plus, on top of that, we've got this free form where someone writes in what is their specific question or concern. So the combination of the two of those allows us to be really effective in the way that we do this.
For sure. That's a really, really important point. Obviously, the key meat of a support ticket is the issue description, which to your point, you may have some drop downs, but at the end of the day, somebody's going to type a few sentences, a few paragraphs saying, this is what's going on. And so to your point, that's entirely unstructured. And again, thanks to this kind of superpower, it's very effective in being able to pull out an appropriate resolution. And I might add, a function like this is global. So we're talking full translation as well. So you can have this served up in whatever your preferred language is as well.
Super awesome. Hey guys, Shravan's back. He was here with us last week and he's back again. Team, can we bring him in to see what's on his mind?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Thanks for joining us again. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, Mark, thanks for these insights, especially these support tickets. And I hear you mention that you use Azure for building your LLM models. And are you doing some fine-tuning on top of that using your other documents, probably by creating vector databases, or you're doing RAG approach? How you're implementing to fine-tune based on your documents?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess the first thing I would say is most of the use cases that we've deployed haven't required that. I think that's an important point because we found that there were a lot of use cases that, using some of these pre-trained models that some of these major vendors have released, that was sufficient to stand up those use cases, which was awesome. Some of these more sophisticated ones, like the one we just talked about, absolutely, they rely on enterprise data. So all these things we just talked about, KBs, support articles and support cases, all of that information, that all needed to be available for those use cases as well. So, that's kind of the grounding component. So several of the automations that we've gone live with did need to be grounded using that enterprise data. And honestly, from a vendor and model perspective, we've made use case by use case selections. I think I probably mentioned in the last conversation, we have established some relationships with some third parties that help stand this up relatively easily. This whole kind of knowledge base so that we can ground the use cases. This particular use case is an example of that, where we used a third party. They were able to do things like help reduce some hallucination we were seeing when we directly hit some of these pre-trained models. So that's what we did in this case.
Thanks for the question. With regards to the models, you mentioned Azure, but we just as a shameless plug, we are a strategic partner with AWS and GCP too. And Mark, are there any specific use cases that you guys are? I know we're doing some other stuff with other customers, but anything in particular where you're using a specific LLM from those guys?
I mean, again, we use a variety of different LLMs. Most of the use cases that we've gone live with, we started off probably like most folks with the offerings from OpenAI. So several of those LLMs are kind of where we started. These days, we're experimenting with different vendors and LLMs. As a company, as you know, Gabe, we're entirely agnostic from that standpoint. So I guess a couple things. Number one, I think that's probably an important perspective. Our experience has been that different vendors and different models are good in certain use cases, number one. Number two, just be aware of getting into analysis paralysis, because again, we found many use cases that we were able to pick one of these pre-trained models and stand up the use case without any further grounding or anything, and get some significant ROI. So you don't want to let the proliferation of different vendors and models get in the way of getting started, I would say.
That's a great point, and just to revisit that, the whole point is that, we're putting generative AI to work right now with the automation success platform. And, as we've mentioned, go take a listen to the previous episode. There's some great examples of where to get started, those quick wins. I also, shameless plug, recommend, if you haven't already, check out the Pathfinder program, and the resources there. Mike and Mark both sort of authored and contributed heavily to that architecture and to the program itself. Mike, or Mark, as you think about the progression from those quick wins to the more complex, what were like some of the learnings and takeaways that were like, aha, okay, now next time we'll do it this way because that'll allow us to do more? Or, what were some of the things that you learned, or maybe even where you scraped your chin a little bit and tripped up?
Yeah, I think there's been a few of those for sure. It's definitely been a learning experience. I think one of them has been, this whole area of prompt engineering. What an important skill that is. I think some of these topics, again, because of all the excitement around generative AI, some of these topics and some of the vocabulary have become confusing to people. I've been invited into conversations where somebody says, hey, they want to understand, how you've trained your models. And my experience is that when people say train your models, they have all sorts of different definitions of what that is. But at the end of the day, again, there's a ton of power just by taking some of these pre-trained LLMs and then applying a good set of prompt engineering skills. So I think, one of the big learnings, Gabe, has just been the importance of investing the time to really develop that muscle of being able to effectively generate prompts. It's kind of like developing automation. It's real easy to stand up something very, very simple, but there are levels. And so, I think we've been able to build some of that capability into the COE and in other areas of IT, and now we're taking that to different business functions. But getting people as quickly as possible into that world and developing that skill set, I think, has been something that's been really, really important. We probably understood that in the beginning, but we have much greater appreciation for it now at this point.
One other thing I would add to that is, if I'm leading an automation program and we're diving into this generative AI plus automation kind of stuff, one thing that I'm really going to focus on is making sure that we're doing a lot of brainstorming when it comes to the way that we're prompting our models. Because I have a way that I might talk to a generative AI model. Mark has a way that he might prompt it. Gabe has a different way. As we're creatively sitting and thinking about these different things, this isn't like writing code where there's really only a couple ways that you can really do it to make it effective. This is there's tons of room for creativity and concepts like this multi-AI agent kind of thing that we were talking about earlier. No one was thinking about that a year ago, but now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, how do I make these different digital agents work together and talk to each other? So yeah, just that creativity and brainstorming, I think, is incredibly important and often overlooked in this process.
Completely agree. I completely agree. And as you're saying that, Micah, just a couple other things that are coming to mind. One is, this idea of iterating is super, super important. I think because of exactly what you mentioned, Micah, anytime a technology allows for a great degree of innovation and creativity, you can get lost in it as well. And you kind of lose the plot. I think one thing that we've learned, or that has become really clear through this journey of generative AI, is, don't forget the fundamentals. We still go back. I don't care if you want to use generative AI and Salesforce Copilot and API tasks and plug all these things together. We still go back to, why are we doing this? What's the value? When's it going live? How big is this thing? Is there a way to chunk it out so that the business gets value sooner. We're still asking those fundamentals. What we don't want to have is, we drown and now it's been 4 months. We're all having fun playing around with it, but we have no outcome. So I can tell you that we're being very, very comfortable to kind of deliver what we can based on where we're at and be satisfied with that, and then think about what's next. We're having lots of discussions these days about things like roadmaps. A lot of the conversations we're having with you, Gabe, in marketing look like that. Let's get out version 1.0. We're getting some value from it. We've had some learnings, and now let's talk about what's coming next.
Yeah, agreed. And I think with the stuff that I'm working on, that's exactly the plan. We talked about sort of at the top where it's, you have some specific use cases, but sort of as you're doing this, at a macro level that the components therein for the use case are scalable and applicable, reusable, for other use cases, right? But to your point, like even saying, to get some value out of it in sort of phase one, like I almost think that is an understatement, because the value that you're getting even in phase one is significant.
Yes.
And it just, gets you even more excited about what phase 2 and phase 3 look like. But to your point, it's important to keep your eye on the prize and keep that North Star and keep some of those guide rails in too, because you could get analysis paralysis, or you could get, just lost in sort of like, oh, we could do a little tweak here. We could do, like anything, right? Yeah. As you're building something.
Yeah. No, 100%, Gabe. And I think just to be completely transparent, you were asking about, are there areas where we've kind of scraped our knee? I think probably one thing I need to point out is, we've killed a few use cases. So some of them we're in the process of resurrecting, but we've had a few situations where we said, this is an awesome use case. We're going to prompt it this way. This is what generative AI is going to get for us. We sunk a certain amount of time trying to get that happen. And we frankly couldn't get the outcome of what we were really envisioning. And in some of those cases, what we did? We made a big boy, big girl decision. And we said, we're not going to sink more time into this right now. We're going to shelve it. We'll come back to it. We think there's something there. But again, we don't want to lose the plot and not be delivering value. And so we've had not a ton of examples like that, but there's definitely a couple that we've done. We're coming back to some of those now with more success. But that's really, really important. Again, the ROI equation has both sides. Of course, we're excited about the value, but the other thing is, how much effort is it going to take to get to that outcome? So I think, again, those fundamentals are important.
I think it's important in the for the audience, like just remember that too. I've had a few of these where like, hey, this seems a good idea, we'll explore it, and then like, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not there yet for whatever reason. It's like there's other things we can do, and it kind of goes back to this idea of there's so much you can do. Don't try to fix the stuff that's just too difficult at the moment, right? And inevitably, I'm sure you'll get learnings, and then you'll be able to to your point, take them off the shelf and readdress them. But I think that's an important recommendation or insight for everybody. The power to say no or say like, it's just not worth it. I think it's a good thing. The other thing I'll say, just regards to prompt engineering, I was just having this conversation with a friend about when you're writing the prompts, treat it. What I do is I try to explain a thing or give feedback as if I was talking to like kind of a smart middle schooler. This is like sort of for simple prompts and stuff, but I've found for effectiveness in sort of feedback loops, that's where I get the best results if I have, if I'm prompting and then re-engaging with sort of an output. So I don't know if that makes sense to people, but I'm curious, like just on a personal level, Micah, Mark, and Simon, my producers out there. Simon, I know you're playing with this a lot too, but what are some of the best practices just generally when you're talking about building prompts?
Micah, do you want to swing at that?
I think one thing that's changed beyond building prompts is how you define the agent's role, right? So when you're starting to build these different agents, give that agent a definition of what it's responsible for. I'm not going to use like a pronoun here because I don't know what the appropriate thing is, but like use language that is indicative of what you need that agent to do for you. So it's almost like writing a very short job description of like what your scope is, what your role is, how you're supposed to respond, documents you're supposed to reference, and things like that. I think that becomes really important because that's some of the grounding that Mark was talking about of like how we're going to frame what your response is. And then when it comes to actually prompting, I'm trying all kinds of creative ways to do it. And I'm like, this is where I think taking a beginner's mindset is really important. So I'm talking to people on my team. We're doing like brainstorming about it. I'm sharing the results of agents that I've created, and I'm sharing that with my team so they can prompt that agent and we can see what's working best for getting the best results from that agent. And I'm treating it like a conversation I would have with a mentor or a friend or some other associate that I'm working with, of like, I'm asking the questions very generally. When it comes to me programming these kind of things, that's when I'm starting to include some kind of like format modifiers. And we've got a great course on AAU on this. It is called Prompt Engineering for Automation Developers. And it goes through some of these different concepts of the ways that you can prompt models, specifically when the results are intended to be interpreted by an automation. But I'm going to send some format modifiers like, hey, you have to respond in a JSON and it has to be the following format. That way, as I'm getting this response back from the model, it's not just like this random freeform thing. I'm getting it back in a format that I know that my automation is able to interpret and will be able to quickly make use of.
And Micah, as you're saying that, it's, you know, the parallels to how we work together as humans I think are all over the place. You know, if you provide someone with a clear job description, they got a good chance of being able to hit a home run. You're really, really vague about it, you may not you may not get what you expect, right? So the more clarity you can specify in terms of what you're expecting, the better.
That's good stuff, guys. I can't believe it. It's 3 to the top of the hour, 3 minutes to the top of the hour. With that little, we say this sometimes jokingly or otherwise, but that flew by. I want to give the audience one more chance to ask a question. Anybody out there, this is your chance. These guys will never be available again. Today only. Just kidding. Oh, there he is coming in. He's going to lob another softball for us. Steven, get in here. Steven got his mic fixed a couple weeks ago, and now he's like, I think he's going to be a regular now. He's going to be like Baba Booey.
What's up?
What's up, dude?
I'm still waiting for that Jimmy Kimmel joke, by the way. So, you ready for the knuckleball?
Let's go.
All right. So this is for all of you. So if you were trying to pick a use case using generative AI to give value specifically to executives or like VP level people at like the tippity top of the ivory tower, what kind of business processes would you pursue? Is there any specific automations that you think would come to mind?
Great question. Thank you, caller.
I'll swing at that first. I would start with any support function. Take your pick. Any support function in your organization. When I say support function, an organization that receives lots of different types of requests that need to be processed. Pick one of those, and I think you'll find that there are gems there. And at least in my experience, I haven't seen that fail. That there's always been something there. Again, the power of generative AI to do things like classify and extract information and understand unstructured data, make that a sweet spot. Gabe or Micah, do you guys want to?
I think that's interesting, Mark, because I think fundamentally, like, maybe it's cheating a little bit, Stephen, but it's a great question. But the idea of anything from a support perspective, right? Because at a C level, what you care about is what we all care about is our customer. But anything that's going to impact customer care, whether that's obviously external for sort of top line reasons, and bottom line reasons, or internally that's creating efficiencies and doing like the 10% savings for the IT org for us, right? That's significant. I think I guess more generally for me is it was kind of mentioning some of the stuff we were talking about for the marketing side. We uncovered some opportunities that now go from individual use cases of save, a couple 100,000, $500,000 each to millions at a time. And I think one of the things, Stephen, specifically is the idea of website degradation. And this is, again, from a marketing lens. But if you think about enterprise level companies, in the amount of pages that are out there, the amount of link rot that is happening because pages have been updated, links have broken, all these different things that have an effect on that, ultimately on that customer experience. Those are expensive activities to go in and optimize and fix and all these kinds of things. And I don't want to geek out too much on it. We could have a whole separate side conversation on this, but the impact of building automations to fix that for the stuff that you can't get to, but actually has significant, value in terms of SERPs, in terms of search engine ranking, and a bunch of other tactical and technical ramifications. That's the one for me, because everyone looks at the website, right? So if I'm building an automation that's going to make our website, we ultimately make our experience with the brand better, more helpful, more useful, get us to rank better, do all the things, that to me, I think our C-suite would be interested in.
All right, so I will give a slightly different answer here, and I think it's a little bit easier to be systematic about this, which is to say, if I look at any of these ivory tower executives that Stephen mentioned, I'm going to look at their entire org, and I'm going to see where do they have the most people and the most funding in a specific area, right? That could be support. If it's like a customer service type leader, that could be someone in operations. But I want to understand where do they have the biggest teams and they're spending the most money. And then I'm going to sniff around like a pig looking for truffles, where I'm going to be trying to understand like what processes are the most expensive for that team, which are the ones that are bogging that team down, which are the ones that they're spending the most money, the most time, the most people, the most resources on. And that's the ones that I'm going to start to look for. At the same time, I'm going to be using generative AI that entire time, where I'm going to have an agent that's like an executive coach help me to structure this conversation in a way where I'm speaking to the things that this leader or this executive cares about. I need to be talking in the types of metrics that they're thinking about. So the ROI on an investment, the expense for their processes, the expense per transaction or things like that. That shows them that I've done my homework. I know their processes. I know where things are really expensive. And this is where I can help to alleviate some of that cost. Because ultimately, at the end of the year, that executive or that leader has to account for what their team was able to produce and how much it costs, right? And if they're able to produce more at a lower cost, that's a huge win for them. And personally, that's probably some bonus territory for them. So that's going to be my approach to making sure that I can have executives that I'm going to win with. I'm going to partner with them. I'm going to be a partner in crime when it comes to helping you to identify your challenging spots and helping you to relieve those.
That's a great point. And I want to be clear too, Mike. I think this idea we kind of talked about before, which is the 10Xer, is like you're not talking about going in and assessing like, where to cut people because they've got, so much headcount. It's about taking the power of the team and giving them that augmented superpower, right? Give them the Superman cape with generative AI powered intelligent automation and 10Xing their capabilities.
Yeah, that's right. So if my team of 10 was able to handle, let's say, 1,000 support tickets last year, how can we enable them to handle 2,000 support tickets next year without having to hire more people, or 20,000 support tickets, right? Whatever that is, I want to make sure that team is equipped to be able to focus on the things that matter and automate the things that don't.
Micah, I think that's all fascinating. I'm still stuck on the imagery of a pig looking for truffles, so I'm kind of stuck.
I think
That was a
it's
good one,
truffle
right? That was like the South coming out in me.
I think it's truffle season too up here in Napa. So y'all come down and we'll go get some 5-star Michelin food. Anyway, actually, you know what? Talking about that, you made me hungry, Micah. So I'm going to cut this off. Once again, thank you to our audience. Happy Friday to y'all. Have a great weekend. Mark G from the COE, thank you so much, man. It's always a pleasure to have you and look forward to doing more with you. I think we've got some, by the way, we've got some interesting stuff we're doing with Mark in other forms of content to help you along this journey. And it's not just Mark, it's the practitioners, it's various folks within IT, within the COE, a lot of stuff coming out to help you on this journey. And of course, you can always just reach out directly to, or you can reach out to me and I'll bug Mark. I know where to find him. But Mark, thank you.
My pleasure.
Micah, as always, make sure you check that mailbag and make sure we get some gems for the next time we do this too, huh?
Absolutely. Always great to talk to you guys, eh? That was my Canadian accent coming through, huh?
Go take some spelling lessons. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.